Chapter 22. At 9 o'clock the following day, John waited outside of Dr. Landerson's office. He shifted his weight back and forth, thinking, why this scheduled meeting? Perhaps it was in regards to Rebecca. Perhaps there would be changes. Whatever happened, John had committed himself to stop trying to force change. He would accept whatever direction his leaders advised. He would be supportive. He would conform. And he would follow these great men. Dr. Landerson rounded the corner with Dr. Gravers at his side. John, wonderful. We're glad you're here. Dr. Landerson's smile widened. It appeared taut and a little forced. I received a message that I was supposed to meet with you, Gary, John said. Yes, and Dr. Gravers will be joining us. Great. John smiled at the president, only to receive a piercing glare from the dark eyes. Quickly, John reprimanded himself for his thoughts. He would learn to like this man. Or if that was impossible, he would at least respect him. As the three men sat around Dr. Landerson's scattered desk, John glanced at the president again, and the dark eyes looked back. No words were exchanged, but the president's lips twisted into a smirk. John abhorred the moments he had to be in Dr. Gravers' presence. Why? Rebecca said he was kind. What was John not seeing? Perhaps he had misled himself into believing this man was not good. With all of the president's accomplishments, how could he not be decent? Questions. They ate at him. There was a chance that John was the paranoid one. He had thought Dr. Gravers did not value him, but there was too little evidence to support such an assumption. Dr. Landerson's voice was overly cheerful. We're glad Dr. Gravers could break away from his busy schedule and meet with us today. There are a few items he and I want to discuss with you. Items we should have addressed sooner. Dr. Gravers' smirk grew wider and the dark eyes glistened. John felt a surge of confidence as he sensed Rebecca was at the heart of the subject to be discussed. It was true. He had been impatient. He had failed to recognize their genuine concern for her. John felt his own face twist up into a happy grin. He had joined them. They were ready to bring him into their inner circle. They would all be able to discuss her now and together share their recommendations for her. At last, John could listen and learn from them. He could trust them. They too were invested in her receiving the right care. Does this pertain to my patients? John asked. Yes, Dr. Gravers said. It does, in a way. Without hesitation, the words tumbled out of John's mouth. Good. I've been anxious to discuss a few things with you. He spoke directly to the president. Your insight is always appreciated. Dr. Landerson interrupted. Dr. Gravers is very busy, John. You can discuss most of your questions with me when we aren't infringing on his time. No, that's fine, Dr. Gravers said, his face softening. Please, Dr. Sanders, tell me about your patients. Well, Rebecca Brownell is the one who is the most in need of our attention. What do you have in mind? Dr. Gravers asked. Steve? Dr. Landerson looked at the president. Do you think this is necessary? Something wasn't right. Go ahead, Dr. Sanders. The dark eyes were focused on him. John ignored the doubt plaguing him. What steps should we take to improve her treatments and accommodate her changing needs? We've taken care of that, Dr. Landerson said. It's been decided that you... Gary, wait, Dr. Gravers said. It's unfortunate, Dr. Sanders, that I was not able to visit one of your therapy sessions with her as I'd hoped. I wanted to ask you a question about some of the things you said to her. Dr. Gravers raised his eyebrows. Yes. I just need to clarify your reasoning for telling her she could stay here for as long as she wants to. Dr. Gravers' answer was soft but commanding. She'll stay here for as long as she needs to. A restraining lump had formed in John's throat. He swallowed in an effort to resume his breathing. Well, I think, as her doctor, I need to understand your reasoning behind this. John, Dr. Landerson's forehead gleamed from materializing beads of sweat. There are some things we need to discuss. Wait, Gary. Dr. Gravers' eyes focused on John. Sanders, Trust Rebecca to our care. John swallowed the second hard lump that had formed, then said, I'd like to recommend her for an outpatient status. Dr. Gravers' words were stern. That's not your concern. John's defiant nature was back. He had abandoned any desire to support this man. He turned to Dr. Landerson and asked, Would Anita have the paperwork, the discharge form? Dr. Landerson wiped his forehead, then looked at Dr. Gravers. Again, the dark eyes studied John, searching for something hidden. Dr. Sanders, you can leave all of this alone. But as her doctor, I think I have a right to. Actually, Dr. Gravers said, you're no longer her doctor. These things don't concern you. What? John, Dr. Landerson said. That's why we've called you in here. We're making some standard changes. He glanced back and forth between both men. Why would you do that? It's just standard, Dr. Landerson said. His eyes rested on Dr. Landerson. But why? Because it's for the best. Is there a reason? John asked. Enough, Dr. Gravers demanded, leaving an agonizing stillness in the air. Then in an expressionless tone, the president said, Ah, Dr. Sanders, how young you are. There is much to be learned here. The attachment you've shown towards some of your patients is unacceptable. We do not allow such weakness at this institution. The prestige we have gained here at Clearcreek is precisely because we pride ourselves on handling our patients in a very appropriate professional manner. While working here, we expect you to do the same. John aimed to control the flowing thoughts of anger. He lowered his tense shoulders and looked at the president, but his palms sweated and his head pounded. He wanted an exit, a way out, anything to break away from Dr. Gravers' engulfing presence. John, Dr. Landerson shifted his weight in the soft chair. Dr. Gravers and I have been observing and discussing your work over the last few months. We both feel your expertise and insight could be best used in the geriatrics wing. We feel you would be a great addition to that group. John looked at Dr. Landerson, then at Dr. Gravers. The air was stiff and uncomfortable. His heart was racing. What will happen to Rebecca? Dr. Gravers shook his head. She'll have another doctor. No, I mean what's going to be done to help her advance, to help her condition improve. We have Dr. Milton, Dr. Gravers said, who is extremely qualified and more experienced in this area. He will assess her needs and determine what is appropriate treatment for her at this time. But I know what her needs are. You're not listening to us, Sanders. Dr. Landerson stepped in. We decided that in her special condition, it would be wise to bring in someone who has had a little bit more experience and is more familiar with what's taking place right now with her mental illness. We want to do what is best for everyone involved, and we feel confident this change will be for the benefit of all. The biased speech, the excuses, the lies, it was all disgusting. These men didn't like how he worked with Rebecca. He was feeding her hope. She could feast on possibilities of new life if they would just allow it. But instead, he frightened them. His energy, his optimism, the opportunity for new life. What was it that Dr. Gravers hated about him? But why geriatrics? John asked. That was not my emphasis in school. In fact, compared to the other units, I've had the least experience with the elderly. Actually, Dr. Landerson said, the setup will be a little different for you. Half of the week we'll have you on graveyard. It's very mild, but you'll be there in case there's a need. The rest of the time, you'll partner with Fisher as his assistant. He'll advise you and direct you. You'll enjoy working with him. It'll be a great opportunity for you. Was there any consideration given to the patients? What was best for them? Questions flew inside John's head, and he desperately wanted answers. But in his state of outrage, he knew the situation could only get worse. He clamped his mouth and his mind shut. Finish up today, Dr. Landerson was saying. Report to me first thing Monday morning, and I'll get you set up with Dr. Fisher. So that's it? John asked. That's all for now. Dr. Gravers looked away while the fake smile on Gary Landerson's face steered John out of the office. That afternoon, when John arrived at Rebecca's room, his mind was empty. He had gone through the motions of the day, but his body was a stranger. Each movement seemed detached and separate from his own. Everything lacked meaning and purpose. He wasn't sure what to say to her. Should he warn her? He struggled to accept the truth, to believe that the conversation with his superiors had actually taken place. He tried to develop an explanation for her, but his mind was blank. The sky was cloudless and the sunlight reflected through the window. John surveyed her room as if he were seeing it for the last time. Her collection of books had expanded and now covered the entire desk corner. The picture of her parents was at the front of the fairy tale lineup. Everything was neat and in order. Everything, including the meticulously folded blue blanket resting on the corner of her bed. It was exposed. John approached the blanket and processed the image before him. Within seconds, she stood near him and they both stared at the lifeless material. "I've been thinking about what you said." "What have you decided?" he asked. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to let it go." John felt numb. He was unsure of what to do. There would be no contact with her again, and he was tired of playing the role of doctor. Finally, he responded. "Well, then you're determined to stay." "It's not that I don't want help," she said. "I'm just not strong enough. I'm sorry, Dr. Sanders. Don't apologize to me. This doesn't have anything to do with me." He was tired. The battle was lost. She looked at him with sadness on her face. "Are you disappointed in me?" "If you want to change your situation, you need to take control of yourself. It's that simple." "But you're right. There's nothing here. I think maybe I want to leave." "Do you want to leave or stay? It's got to be one or the other." John approached the window and stared at the bright sun rays. "I want to leave," she said. He studied the tall trees. The branches wavered against the wind. "Good. Then give me the blanket." "I don't know if I'm ready for that. At least, not yet." "It's a choice, Rebecca. I don't know how to let go. Maybe I think that, well, maybe if you could you just take it from me? Take Robert's blanket from me." He maintained his focus on the images outside. "I can't." "Why not?" "You have to release it. You've tried to take it before. That time has passed. This has to do with your effort." John turned to face her. "In order to be free from Clearcreek, you need to let go." Rebecca bit her lip, then whispered, "I just need your help." His throat tightened. He felt helpless, but he had no choice. But then came the rush of undiluted guilt. How could he leave her to fall prey to Dr. Gravers? "Rebecca, can you give me the blanket? Can you release it?" She approached the folded blanket. Her hands glided over the fabric. She wrapped her fingers around the folds and raised it to her chest. For a moment, she closed her eyes. Then abruptly, she dropped the blanket and retreated. On the other side of the room, she slammed her fists against the table. "I can't do it. But I will, Dr. Sanders. Not yet. But I will." "When, Rebecca?" "I don't know. But I want your help. Just keep working with me. Keep asking me about the blanket, and I'll let it go." "Will you?" he said softly. "Yes, I will. I promise." Early Monday morning, John waited in Dr. Landerson's office. The director arrived and placed a full pot of coffee on a random pile among scattered pages. He patted John on the shoulder. "All right, you ready to meet your new patients?" "I'm not happy about this change," John said. "I know." John remained seated. "Gary, let me have a little more time. You'll be pleased with the results. Good things are on the verge of happening, and I don't think changing doctors is the best thing right now. John, Dr. Landerson held the door ajar for John to enter. The big man has spoken. In all the years I've known him, what he says goes. He's decided. It's no use trying to change his mind. You're going to have to accept things for how they are. But can't I... Listen to me, Sanders. He shut the door and headed over to his desk. Dr. Gravers has struggled with some things you've done, and I've had to do a lot of talking to keep the peace around here. He picked up a sheet of paper, only to discard it for a different one. Please, for both our sakes, let it go. Put your time and energy on your new surroundings. Gary. John waited until his supervisor paused from his paper hunt to look at him. It's time for Rebecca to move on. I think in a very short time everyone will see that. Landerson set the paper back on the stack. That's fine. When it's time, it's time. But she isn't your worry anymore. She moved the coffee pot onto another stack, then shuffled through a small stack. Dr. Milton will take good care of her. There it is. He raised the document up and waved it at John. Your new charge. John held his breath, waiting until the director made eye contact with him. You don't think she can make it out there, do you? The man set down the paper and rubbed his eyes. I've told you countless times how I feel about her. You've worn me out, and I don't want to hear about it anymore. She's not your concern. Do you care? The question came out a bit too strong. Dr. Landerson released a frustrated sigh. Of course I care. I want what's best for Rebecca. That's why we are making these changes. She's improved. She has. Then help me. No. He retrieved the paper again. You are unable to assist her. You are too attached, and that has to stop. It'll ruin you. Do you think she should still be here? It doesn't matter what I think. Landerson headed toward the door. We need to listen to Dr. Gravers. John's neck muscles tightened. This is very hard to hear, Gary. His hand held the doorknob. Gravers knows how to run this place. Well, something needs to change. Landerson stared at the door. It's been like this for years. He released the doorknob and looked at John directly. You aren't the first to be upset by it, and you probably won't be the last. Dr. Gravers is looking to see a difference before there can be modifications. Every patient? He has to oversee a difference in every patient before he okays progress? Each situation is different. But how he is regarding Rebecca, is he like that for all the others? I don't know what you're asking. His hand was back on the doorknob. He's always had a special interest in her, from the moment she arrived. She's fortunate he's so concerned about her welfare. Fortunate? John held back a sarcastic laugh. Dr. Landerson threw his hands up as if in defeat. There's not much else we can do. Let's go meet your new patients. Wait. Sanders, I don't want to spend all day discussing Rebecca Brownell. He pulled open the door. We've been over this too much already. Detach yourself from this and focus on your new assignment. All right, I will. But I get to tell the group goodbye first, right? Goodbye? I've spent a year with these patients. We don't make a big fanfare over this kind of transition. Come on, Gary. I've spent a lot of energy working with these people to trust me. I owe it to them to offer some type of explanation. Explanation? Dr. Landerson sighed. I don't know about you, Sanders. You concern me. They're all together right now, with their recreation tech. Let me just visit them briefly. Gary shot a look at the overhead clock. I don't have time for this. Please, John said. Let's make this quick.